The last prayer Daniel Harper whispered was not a surrender, it was an apology. "I don't know how to do this anymore." The words barely left his mouth before dissolving into the stillness of the hospital corridor. They did not echo. They did not return comfort. They simply vanished, absorbed by fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell that clung to everything like a quiet accusation. The clock above the nurse's station read 2:17 a.m. Daniel had been sitting in the same plastic chair for hours, his back rigid, his hands folded more out of habit than faith. His Bible rested unopened on his lap, its worn leather cover familiar beneath his fingers, as if it remembered something he could not. Behind the closed door in front of him, the machines continued their slow, mechanical breathing. Not hers, theirs. Every rise and fall of the monitor sounded like a question God had refused to answer. When the doctor finally approached, Daniel knew before a single word was spoken. He had learned to read silence well. Silence had become fluent in his life. "I'm sorry," the doctor said quietly. Daniel nodded. He did not cry. He did not ask why. He did not fall apart the way people expected grieving husbands to fall apart. He simply stood, thanked the man with a politeness that surprised even himself, and walked into the room. Emily lay still, her face peaceful in a way that felt cruel. Her hair was brushed back just as she liked it. Someone had removed the tubes. Someone had tried to make death look gentle. Daniel stepped closer. For a long moment he waited, irrationally, for her chest to rise again, for her fingers to twitch, for the faint squeeze of reassurance she used to give when words felt unnecessary. Nothing. He reached for her hand. It was already cooling. That was the moment something inside him fractured. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a soundless break that would take years to fully surface. "I stayed," he whispered. "I prayed. I believed." The words felt foreign, like lines from a script he no longer recognized. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against the edge of the bed, his shoulders trembling under a weight too heavy to name. "I did everything right." There it was, the unspoken contract. Daniel had been faithful. He had led prayer groups, volunteered every weekend, spoken gently about trust and surrender. He had believed, truly believed, that obedience meant protection. But Emily still died. The machines were silenced. The room felt unbearably large. God felt impossibly distant. When Daniel finally left the hospital, dawn was beginning to bleed into the sky, pale and indifferent. The world continued, unbothered by the fact that his had ended. At home, the house greeted him with echoes. Her shoes were still by the door. Her mug sat in the sink, a faint ring of coffee marking yesterday as if it mattered. A blanket lay folded on the couch, waiting for a body that would never return to claim it. Daniel stood in the doorway for a long time, keys still in his hand. He did not pray. That absence, the deliberate choice not to speak to God, felt heavier than grief itself. Days blurred into weeks. The funeral passed in fragments of black clothing, murmured condolences, and well-meaning scripture that landed like stones against his chest. People told him Emily was in a better place. They told him God had a plan. Daniel smiled. He nodded. He thanked them. At night, when the house fell quiet again, he sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the same verse he had once loved. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted." He traced the words with his finger, waiting for them to mean something again. They didn't. What he did not tell anyone, what he barely admitted to himself, was that the prayers had stopped entirely, not out of anger, not out of rebellion, but because every time he tried, the words died before reaching his lips. Silence had become his only honest response, and in that silence, something else stirred, something darker than grief, something closer to betrayal. Daniel began to wonder if God had ever been listening at all. Daniel stopped opening the curtains. Morning light still crept into the house, slipping through the thin gaps at the edges, but he no longer invited it in. The brightness felt inappropriate, almost offensive, as if the day itself were insisting on hope he did not possess. Grief, he learned, was not loud the way movies portrayed it. It was quiet, administrative. It arrived disguised as routine. Bills had to be paid, emails answered, forms signed. Emily's name appeared everywhere, in hospital statements, insurance documents, reminders for appointments she would never attend. Each letter was a small, precise cut, reopening something that had never fully closed. People stopped calling after a few weeks. At first, the silence felt merciful. Later, it felt like abandonment. Daniel returned to work because staying home had become unbearable. The office was neutral ground, sterile, predictable, untouched by memory. His co-workers spoke in careful tones, avoiding Emily's name as if it were fragile glass. "How are you holding up?" someone asked one morning near the coffee machine. Daniel paused, cup in hand. "I'm okay," he said. It was the answer people wanted. It allowed them to move on without guilt. What he did not say was that okay had become a word without meaning. It was a placeholder, a shield. At night, the house felt different. The absence was not just emotional, it was physical. The sound of the refrigerator humming too loudly, the clock ticking with irritating insistence, the way the bed seemed wider, colder. Emily used to pray before sleeping, not long prayers, just a few quiet words, whispered with a familiarity that suggested she was speaking to someone she trusted deeply. Daniel used to listen with his eyes closed, letting her faith carry him when his own felt tired. Now the night stretched endlessly. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments he could not correct. The argument 3 days before she collapsed. The way he had left the room instead of staying to talk. The sharpness in his voice when he told her he was exhausted. "I'll make it up to you tomorrow," he had thought. Tomorrow never came. One night, unable to endure the pressure building inside his chest, Daniel reached for the Bible on the nightstand. His hands hesitated before opening it, as if touching the pages might accuse him. He flipped randomly, landing in the Psalms. The words stared back at him, raw and desperate. "How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever?" He exhaled sharply. "So even David felt this," he muttered. But instead of comfort, the verse ignited something else. Resentment. David had been rescued. David's cries had been answered. David's story had an arc that bent toward restoration. Daniel closed the Bible. Where was that for her? He asked the empty room. The question lingered unanswered. Sunday arrived quietly. Daniel stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie he no longer wanted to wear. Church had once been a place of belonging, of shared language and shared hope. Now, the thought of walking into that sanctuary filled him with a strange dread. He went anyway. Old habits were stubborn. The worship music swelled around him, voices rising in unison. Words about faithfulness, about trust, about God's nearness filled the room. Daniel remained still. He did not sing. Every lyric felt like a claim he could no longer verify. When the pastor spoke about suffering, about God's purposes beyond human understanding, Daniel felt something tighten in his jaw. Not anger, not yet, but a slow, corrosive doubt. After the service, people surrounded him with gentle smiles and practiced empathy. "We're still praying for you," one woman said, squeezing his arm. Daniel nodded. The word praying felt oddly hollow. That afternoon, he found himself standing in Emily's closet. He had avoided it for weeks, afraid of what might break open if he went too far. Her clothes still carried her scent, faint, familiar, devastating. He pulled out a sweater, pressing it to his face before he could stop himself. "I tried," he whispered. The confession slipped out without permission. "I really tried." The room answered with silence. That night, for the first time since the hospital, Daniel knelt beside the bed. The posture felt unfamiliar, almost theatrical. "I don't even know why I'm doing this," he said quietly. No response. "I prayed for healing," he continued. "I believed you could do it. I told others to believe it too." His voice wavered, frustration creeping in around the edges. "And you didn't." He waited. Still nothing. The silence did not feel peaceful. It felt deliberate, like being ignored. Daniel stood abruptly, heart pounding. "Fine," he said, his voice tight. "Then don't answer." He turned off the light and lay down, staring into the dark. That night something shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but a small, dangerous thought began to take root. What if faith had been nothing more than a comfort he invented? And worse, what if trusting God had only made the loss hurt more? Sleep eventually came, heavy and dreamless. But the silence followed him, learning his name, settling into the corners of his life like it intended to stay. Daniel learned how to disappear while still being seen. He answered emails on time. He attended meetings. He nodded in conversations and laughed when expected. From the outside, his life appeared intact, slightly quieter perhaps, but functional, respectable. Inside, something continued to recede. Friends invited him out less frequently, interpreting his polite refusals as a need for space. He did not correct them. Space was easier than explanation. Silence required no translation. The first time someone mentioned Emily casually, her name slipping into conversation without warning, Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. "She used to love that place," a colleague said, smiling gently. "Remember?" Daniel smiled back. "Yes," he replied. What he did not say was that memory no longer felt warm. It felt sharp, like touching something broken without gloves. He stopped visiting Emily's parents. At first, he told himself it was consideration, that he didn't want to reopen their wounds. The truth was harder to face. Being near them forced him to confront a grief that mirrored his own, and worse, a question he could not escape. Why her? Why not him? Guilt settled into his days with quiet persistence. It followed him home, sat beside him at the dinner table, lay awake with him at night. There were things he had never told Emily, not betrayals, not sins that would scandalize anyone, but truths nonetheless. Doubts he had buried beneath responsibility, resentments he had disguised as patience, fears he had swallowed instead of speaking aloud. He had told himself there would be time. Now, time felt like a closed door. One evening, unable to remain indoors, Daniel walked aimlessly through the neighborhood. The streets were familiar, unchanged by his loss. Children rode bicycles. A couple argued softly on a porch. Somewhere a radio played music. Life, indifferent and relentless, continued. He found himself standing in front of the small community church where he had first learned to pray as a child. The building looked smaller than he remembered. Paint peeled near the windows. The sign out front announced a midweek prayer meeting. Daniel almost laughed. Prayer. He sat on the steps instead, hands clasped loosely, staring at the door. A memory surfaced uninvited. He was 12 years old, sitting in the back row, his feet not quite touching the floor. His father stood at the pulpit that night, voice steady, speaking about faith and obedience. Daniel remembered the weight of expectation more than the message itself. God honors those who trust him completely, his father had said. Later that same year, his father left. No explanation, no goodbye sermon, just absence. The church had tried to soften it. People spoke of complex circumstances, of private matters. Daniel learned early that faith communities were as uncomfortable with failure as anyone else. His mother cried quietly at night. During the day, she smiled with determination, clinging to routine as if it might hold their family together by force of habit. Daniel learned another lesson then. Silence was safer than questions. Sitting on the church steps now, decades later, he felt the echo of that same silence wrapping around him. "So this is familiar," he murmured. He stood and walked away before the door could open. That night, the dreams returned. Emily stood at the end of a long hallway, her back turned. Daniel called her name, his voice growing louder with each attempt. She did not turn around. He woke with his heart racing, the sheets tangled around his legs. For the first time since the hospital, he cried, not loudly, not dramatically. Tears slipped silently into the pillow as his body shook with the effort of restraint. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the dark. The words were not directed at God. Not really. They were meant for Emily, for his younger self, for the man he had tried to become. In the days that followed, the past pressed closer. A box he had not opened in years surfaced while he searched the attic for something unrelated. Inside were old notebooks, sermon outlines from his father's time in ministry, childhood drawings, letters. One envelope caught his attention. His name was written on the front in his mother's handwriting. Daniel hesitated before opening it. Inside was a letter he vaguely remembered receiving, but never fully reading. The paper was worn, creased from years of folding and unfolding. "Daniel, I wanted to tell you this sooner, but I didn't know how. Your father didn't leave because of God. He left because he was tired of pretending. He was afraid that if he stayed, you would learn how to hide instead of how to live honestly." Daniel's chest tightened. "I didn't tell you, because I thought protecting your faith mattered more than telling the truth. I see now that silence can wound just as deeply." He read the letter twice, then a third time. Something shifted. The realization came slowly, unwelcome and undeniable. He had learned how to survive loss long before Emily died. He had learned how to compartmentalize pain, how to keep moving without healing, how to believe without questioning. And now, faced with a loss too large to ignore, all those unfinished wounds were resurfacing at once. Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. That night, he sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. For the first time, he allowed himself to think the thought he had been avoiding. Maybe this isn't just about losing Emily. The idea frightened him more than grief ever had, because if that were true, then his crisis of faith had roots deeper than he was ready to confront. And somewhere beneath the silence, a truth he had spent his entire life avoiding was beginning to demand attention. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary moment that never announces its importance. Daniel almost let it go to voicemail. He was standing in the grocery store aisle, staring at shelves of cereal he had no intention of buying, paralyzed by the absurdity of choice. Emily had always teased him about this, how something as simple as deciding between brands could overwhelm him. "Just pick one," she used to laugh. "It's not a life decision." The phone vibrated again. Unknown number. With a quiet sigh, Daniel answered. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end. A breath. Familiar, somehow. "Daniel, it's Mark." The sound of the name landed heavily in his chest. Mark Lewis, his father's former assistant, a man Daniel had not seen in nearly 20 years. "Yes," Daniel said carefully. "I remember." "I wasn't sure if you would," Mark replied. His voice was older now, rougher around the edges. "I heard about Emily. I'm sorry." Daniel leaned against the cart, gripping the handle. "Thank you." Another pause stretched between them. "I wouldn't have called," Mark continued, "but your mother gave me your number. She said now might be the right time." "For what?" Daniel asked. "To talk." The word felt heavier than it should have. "I don't think that's a good idea," Daniel said. "I understand," Mark replied quickly, "but there are things I should have said a long time ago. Things your father couldn't." Silence filled the line. Daniel closed his eyes. "I'll think about it," he said finally. They agreed to meet 2 days later at a small cafe near the edge of town. Neutral ground, safe distance. When Daniel arrived, Mark was already there, seated by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His hair was grey now, his posture slightly stooped, but his eyes were the same, steady, observant, uncomfortably kind. They exchanged brief greetings, both aware of the weight pressing between them. "I didn't know how to reach you," Mark said once they were seated. "After your father left, everything collapsed." Daniel nodded. "That's one way to put it." Mark winced slightly, as if the words had struck closer than intended. "I failed you," he said quietly. Daniel stiffened. He had not come prepared for that. "You were a kid," Mark continued. "You deserved honesty. Instead, you were given scripture and silence." The phrase echoed painfully. Daniel stared at the table. "My father chose to leave," he said. "Whatever happened after that isn't your responsibility." Mark shook his head slowly. "He didn't just choose to leave," he said. "He chose to stop pretending." The words felt uncomfortably familiar. "Your father was drowning," Mark went on. "Not in sin the way people like to imagine, in exhaustion, in fear, in the pressure of being seen as a man of faith who could never admit doubt." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Faith isn't supposed to feel like that." "No," Mark agreed, "but sometimes it does." And they sat in silence for a moment, the cafe's background noise filling the space neither knew how to occupy. "There's something else," Mark said finally. "Something I never told anyone." Daniel looked up. "Your father planned to come back." The words landed with unexpected force. "He left to figure out who he was without the pulpit," Mark continued. "He thought distance might help him heal instead of unravel." Daniel felt his heart pounding. "He wrote letters," Mark said. "To you. To your mother. He asked me to hold them until he was ready." Daniel swallowed hard. "Where are they?" Mark's expression darkened. "He died before he could return." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "He had a heart attack," Mark added softly, 2 years after he left. Daniel stared at him, his thoughts scrambling to keep up. "Why didn't we know?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "Because I was afraid," Mark admitted. "Afraid the truth would destroy what little faith you had left." The irony stung. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a hollow laugh escaping his lips. "So instead, you let me believe he abandoned us." Mark's eyes filled with regret. "Yes." They sat there for a long time, the past rearranging itself piece by piece. Later that evening, Daniel drove aimlessly through the city, the conversation replaying in fragments. He planned to come back. He wrote letters. He was afraid. The words collided with memories Daniel had carried like unchallenged facts. At home, he stood in the living room, the space suddenly unfamiliar. The narrative he had lived by, of abandonment, of unresolved betrayal, had cracked. In its place was something more complicated, more painful, and more human. Daniel found himself kneeling again, not because he intended to pray, but because his legs could no longer hold him. "If you knew all this," he whispered, his voice raw, "why didn't you tell me sooner?" The question was not accusatory. It was tired. The silence that followed was different from before, still present but not empty. It carried weight, as if something unseen was listening, waiting. Daniel did not hear a voice, but for the first time in months, he did not feel completely alone in the quiet. Daniel did not sleep that night. He lay on his back, staring into the darkness, Mark's words looping endlessly in his mind. Each repetition shifted something inside him, loosening old certainties and replacing them with questions he did not yet know how to hold. He planned to come back. The idea felt almost cruel. Hope, retroactively applied. At dawn, Daniel rose quietly and dressed without turning on the lights. The house seemed to watch him, every room bearing witness to a life that had slowly narrowed into survival. He drove to his mother's house just as the morning fog began to lift. She opened the door with surprise that softened into relief. "I thought you might come," she said, stepping aside. They sat at the kitchen table, where Daniel had done homework decades earlier, where his mother had once folded laundry while humming hymns under her breath. "I spoke to Mark," Daniel said. She nodded slowly, her hands tightening around her mug. "I wondered when that would happen." "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. The question carried no accusation, only exhaustion. His mother looked down at the table, tracing the grain of the wood, as if searching for words hidden there. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "I thought faith needed certainty to survive." Daniel exhaled. And what did it need instead? She looked up at him, her eyes wet but steady. "Truth," she said, "even when it hurts." She stood and disappeared into the hallway, returning moments later with a small, worn box. "He asked Mark to hold on to these," she said, placing it gently in front of Daniel. "After he died, Mark brought them to me. I didn't know when or if you would ever be ready." Daniel stared at the box. His name was written on the lid, faded but unmistakable. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside were letters, neatly stacked, bound together with a fraying ribbon. His father's handwriting filled each envelope, familiar and suddenly intimate in a way it had never been before. Daniel picked up the first letter. He hesitated. Reading it would change something. He felt that instinctively. He unfolded the paper. "Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I was too afraid to say these words out loud. I want you to know that my leaving was not a rejection of you or your mother. It was a confession of weakness." Daniel's throat tightened. "I loved preaching. I loved scripture. But somewhere along the way, I stopped believing I was allowed to be human in front of God. Or you." The words cut deeply, not because they were unfamiliar, but because they were painfully recognizable. "I was terrified you would learn to perform faith instead of live it. I didn't know how to teach honesty without first finding it myself." Daniel closed his eyes, breathing unevenly. Letter after letter revealed a man Daniel had never truly known. A man afraid of God's disappointment, afraid of hypocrisy, afraid of being exposed. A man who loved his son fiercely, but did not know how to stay. When Daniel finished reading, the house was quiet again. His mother watched him carefully, as if gauging whether he might break. "I didn't know he was like that," Daniel said finally. "I did," she replied softly, "but I didn't know how to say it." On the drive home, Daniel felt something loosening inside him. Not relief, not peace, but understanding. That night, he sat alone at the kitchen table, Emily's empty chair across from him. He placed the letters beside her old mug, as if inviting them into the space she had once filled. "I didn't lose faith, because you failed," he said quietly, the words surprising him as they formed. "I lost it because I never learned how to bring doubt with me." The silence that followed did not accuse him. It waited. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes. For the first time since Emily's death, he did not feel the urge to defend himself before God. He did not rehearse arguments or demands. He simply allowed the grief to exist, and in that permission, something unexpected happened. He remembered Emily's voice, not from a dream, not imagined, just a memory, vivid and gentle. You don't have to understand everything to trust, she used to say. You just have to stay. Daniel opened his eyes, tears blurring his vision. I don't know how to stay anymore, he whispered. The answer did not come in words, but the silence no longer felt like rejection. It felt like invitation. Forgiveness did not arrive gently. Daniel had expected it to feel like relief, a release of pressure, a softening of the chest, something warm and reassuring. Instead, it came as resistance, as friction, as the slow, painful work of choosing something his emotions refused to cooperate with. He discovered this on a Thursday afternoon, standing in line at the post office. The woman in front of him turned slightly, her profile familiar in a way that unsettled him. When she looked up, recognition flickered across her face, followed by hesitation. "Daniel?" she asked quietly. It took him a second. Sarah Whitmore, Emily's younger sister. They had not spoken since the funeral. "Yes," he said. She nodded, her mouth tightening as if bracing herself. "I didn't know you were back in town," she said. "I never left." An awkward silence settled between them, thick with everything unsaid. "I was going to call," Sarah offered. "I just didn't know what to say." Daniel studied her face. She looked older than he remembered, the sharpness of grief etched plainly around her eyes. "It's fine," he said, and immediately knew it wasn't true. They exited the building together, the afternoon sun harsh and uninviting. "Would you like to get coffee?" Sarah asked suddenly. "You don't have to. I just thought—" Daniel hesitated. Part of him wanted to refuse, to protect the fragile equilibrium he had finally begun to assemble. Another part, the quieter, more honest part, knew avoidance had cost him enough already. "Okay," he said. The cafe was small, almost empty. They chose a corner table, both sitting stiffly, unsure where to begin. Sarah was the first to speak. "I blamed you," she said, her voice flat. Daniel nodded slowly. "I figured. For a long time," she continued. "I thought if you had prayed more, or believed harder, or pushed the doctors." Her words trailed off, heavy with regret. "I know it's not fair," she added quickly, "but grief doesn't care about fairness." Daniel stared into his cup. "I blamed God," he said. Sarah's eyes flicked up. "And myself," he added, "for believing." The admission surprised them both. "I watched you pray," Sarah said after a moment. "I watched you stand there so sure, and when she died, I hated that certainty. It felt like a lie." Daniel swallowed. So did I. They sat in silence, the weight of shared loss bridging the distance between them. "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice tightening. "I said things to people about you." Daniel met her gaze. "I know." She exhaled shakily. "I'm sorry." The word hung between them, fragile and insufficient. Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the instinct to minimize, to reassure, to smooth things over without engaging the pain underneath. He resisted it. "Forgiving you doesn't erase what happened," he said carefully. "And I don't feel ready, not fully." Sarah nodded, tears welling. "I understand. But I don't want to keep carrying this," Daniel continued. "Not for Emily, not for me." The words felt heavy as he spoke them, but also necessary. "I choose to forgive you," he said, "even if it hurts." Sarah covered her mouth, tears slipping free. "Thank you," she whispered. As they stood to leave, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not peace, not yet, but alignment. That evening, Daniel returned home emotionally exhausted. Forgiveness, he learned, was not a moment. It was a posture, one that required repetition and resolve. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. "Is this what staying looks like?" he asked the quiet, letting it hurt instead of running? No answer came, but the silence did not feel empty. Days later, Daniel received another call. This time, it was Mark again. "I found something," Mark said. "Something your father asked me to keep separate." They met at Mark's house, a modest place lined with books and framed photographs from a life lived quietly. Mark handed Daniel a single envelope. "This was the last one," he said. "He wrote it shortly before he died." Daniel opened it slowly. "Daniel, if faith ever costs you comfort, I pray you choose honesty over performance. God does not fear your questions. I did, and it almost destroyed me." Daniel closed his eyes, the words pressing deeply into him. For the first time he understood. Faith was not the absence of doubt. It was the decision to remain present despite it. That night, Daniel knelt again, not out of habit, not out of obligation, but because something inside him had softened enough to bend. "I don't know what comes next," he said quietly, "but I'm still here." The words felt small, costly, true. And for the first time in a long while, the silence felt like it was holding him rather than pushing him away. The invitation arrived without ceremony. Daniel found it folded among bills and advertisements, the envelope plain, his name handwritten in a careful script he did not recognize. He almost discarded it unopened, assuming it was another reminder of a life that no longer existed. But something made him pause. Inside was a single card. Community Grief Support. Thursday evening facilitator, Ana Morales. Daniel read it twice. Grief support. The words stirred an unexpected resistance. Grief had become private terrain for him, something he navigated alone, cautiously, without witnesses. The thought of sitting in a circle of strangers, speaking aloud what he had barely begun to admit to himself, felt invasive. And yet, he folded the card and placed it on the counter, where it remained for 3 days. On Thursday evening, Daniel stood in his hallway, coat in hand, staring at the door. "You don't have to go," he told himself. Staying home would be easier, familiar, safe. But safety, he was beginning to learn, was not the same as healing. He drove across town as dusk settled in, the sky dimming into a bruised blue. The building was modest, a community center tucked between a closed daycare and a quiet park. Inside, the room was softly lit. Chairs were arranged in a loose circle. A few people sat quietly, their faces guarded, their postures careful. Daniel chose a seat near the edge. Ana Morales introduced herself with calm simplicity. She did not ask anyone to explain their loss. She did not rush the silence. She let it exist, unforced. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, his throat tightened. "I'm Daniel," he said. "My wife died 8 months ago." A murmur of acknowledgement passed through the room. "I used to believe..." He stopped, searching for the words. "I used to believe that if I trusted God enough, He would protect us." No one interrupted him. "And when that didn't happen," Daniel continued, his voice steady but thin, "I stopped talking to Him. I didn't know how to stay without pretending." Something shifted in the room. After the meeting, Anna approached him quietly. "You spoke honestly," she said. "That takes courage." "It felt like exposure," Daniel replied. She smiled gently. "Healing often does." Weeks passed. Daniel returned to the group, slowly, deliberately. Each meeting stripped away another layer of isolation. He listened to stories that mirrored his own pain in unfamiliar forms. Parents who had lost children, siblings fractured by resentment, faith reshaped by tragedy. One evening, Anna asked him to stay behind. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. "Would you consider sharing your story more intentionally, not as advice, just as presence?" Daniel hesitated. "You mean lead?" "Not lead," she clarified. Witness. The word unsettled him. He had stood behind pulpits before. He knew the danger of speaking from places not yet healed. I'm not restored, he said. Anna nodded. Neither are the people who need to hear you. That night, Daniel walked home through the park instead of driving. The air was cool, the lamps casting long shadows across the path. I'm afraid, he admitted quietly. Not to Anna, not to anyone else, to God. The fear was not of speaking, it was of being seen, of stepping into a space where his faith could no longer hide behind silence. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Emily, standing in their kitchen years earlier, her hands dusted with flour, smiling at him. You don't have to be strong all the time, she had said. Just be honest. Daniel stopped walking. The realization struck him with quiet clarity. Staying did not only mean enduring grief, it meant allowing others to see him within it. The following Thursday, Daniel stood in front of the small group, his hands trembling slightly. I don't have answers, he began. I still have days when prayer feels impossible, but I'm learning that faith isn't certainty, it's presence. He spoke slowly, deliberately, careful not to instruct or persuade. He told them about Emily, about silence, about staying when leaving would have been easier. When he finished, the room remained quiet. Then someone began to cry. Another spoke softly. Another nodded. Daniel felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest, not resolution, but connection. Later that night, alone in his kitchen, Daniel realized something else. By choosing to stay visible, he had crossed a threshold. There would be no returning to comfortable faith, no hiding behind performance or silence. What lay ahead would require more than endurance. It would require surrender, and he did not yet know what that would cost. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, the room lit only by the small lamp near the sink, when his phone vibrated against the wood. He stared at it for a moment, annoyed by the intrusion. Night had become the only time that belonged to him alone. He answered without checking the number. Daniel? The voice on the other end was unsteady, breathless. It's Anna. His posture changed instantly. What's wrong? There's been an accident, she said. It's Marcus, one of the men from the group. Daniel's mind raced. Marcus was quiet, rarely spoke, a widower, 2 children, always sat with his hands folded, eyes lowered. He tried to take his life, Anna continued. They stopped him in time, but he's at the hospital. He keeps asking for you. Daniel closed his eyes. For a brief, shameful second, he wanted to say no. He felt unqualified, unprepared, afraid of stepping into a pain that mirrored his own too closely. He had spent months learning how to stay alive inside his grief. He did not know how to keep someone else from drowning in theirs. I'm on my way, he said. The hospital corridor felt hauntingly familiar. The same sterile smell, the same muted lighting, the same quiet urgency in the air. Daniel's footsteps slowed as he approached Marcus's room. He could hear voices inside, soft, controlled, clinical. A nurse stepped out as Daniel approached. He's awake, she said. He's calm now, but he asked for you specifically. Daniel nodded, his throat dry. Inside, Marcus lay propped up against pillows, his face pale, eyes hollowed by exhaustion. When he saw Daniel, something broke open. I didn't think you'd come, Marcus said. Daniel pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. I almost didn't, he replied honestly, but I'm here. Marcus turned his head toward the window. I prayed, he said quietly. For years. After my wife died, I begged God to take the pain away. When he didn't, I thought maybe he wanted me gone too. Daniel felt the words land heavily, each one echoing something he had never voiced aloud. What stopped you? Daniel asked. Marcus swallowed. I remembered something you said, he replied, about staying even when it hurts. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I didn't stay because I was strong," he said. "I stayed because leaving didn't heal anything." Marcus closed his eyes, tears slipping free. "I don't feel God," he whispered. "I don't even know if I believe anymore." Daniel leaned forward. "Neither did I," he said. "For a long time. Faith didn't return as a feeling, it returned as a decision." They sat together in silence, the machines humming softly in the background. For the first time, Daniel did not feel helpless in the quiet. He did not quote scripture. He did not explain suffering. He did not offer promises he could not guarantee. He stayed. Hours later, when Marcus finally slept, Daniel stepped out into the hallway, his body heavy with exhaustion. Anna stood nearby, arms crossed tightly. "Thank you," she said. "You don't know what this meant to him." Daniel nodded. "I think I do." As he drove home, the city empty and dark, Daniel felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath the fatigue. Purpose. Not the kind he used to preach about. Not a calling wrapped in certainty and clarity, but a quiet awareness that his pain was no longer only his. At home, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his hands resting loosely on his knees. "I don't know what you're doing," he said softly into the room. "But if this is where you are, I'll meet you here." The words did not feel dramatic. They felt grounded. That night, Daniel dreamed of Emily again. This time she was not walking away. She stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She did not speak. She did not need to. When Daniel woke, his pillow was wet with tears, but his chest felt lighter than it had in months. For the first time, he understood something essential. Faith was no longer about what God might do for him. It was about who he was becoming while staying. And that realization prepared him, quietly, irrevocably, for the final transformation still ahead. Restoration did not arrive as an event. There was no moment Daniel could point to and say, "This is when everything changed." No sudden lifting of grief, no clear line between brokenness and healing. Instead, it arrived the way dawn does, almost unnoticed, until light was already everywhere. Marcus stayed in the hospital for several weeks. Daniel visited often, sometimes speaking, sometimes sitting in silence. Other members of the group joined him. No one pretended to understand what had almost been lost. They acknowledged it honestly. They stayed. When Marcus was discharged, he did not thank God for saving him. He thanked Daniel for coming, and something in that unsettled Daniel in the best possible way. He began to see how grace moved, not loudly, not theatrically, but through ordinary obedience, through showing up when retreat would have been easier. Emily's absence remained. Some mornings, Daniel still reached instinctively for the other side of the bed. Some nights, grief returned with sharp clarity, pressing against his chest without warning, but it no longer ruled him. He learned how to let sorrow exist without interpreting it as failure, either his own or God's. On a quiet afternoon months later, Daniel visited Emily's grave alone. The grass was neatly trimmed. Fresh flowers from her parents rested near the stone. Her name caught the light softly, as if it belonged there. Daniel knelt and traced the engraved letters with his fingers. "I thought trusting God meant being protected from loss," he said quietly. "I see now it meant being carried through it." The wind moved gently through the trees. No voice answered him, but he felt no urge to fill the silence anymore. "I miss you," he added simply. And for the first time, the words did not feel like an accusation against heaven. They felt like love, unburdened. As months passed, the grief group grew. New faces appeared, new stories unfolded. Daniel never positioned himself as someone who had arrived at answers. He spoke only from where he stood, from honesty, from weakness, from presence. One evening, a young man approached him after the meeting. "I stopped praying after my father died," the man admitted. I thought that meant I'd lost my faith. Daniel considered this carefully before answering. No, he said. It means you're telling the truth. The man nodded, eyes wet. Daniel went home that night, aware of something profound and humbling. His suffering had not been erased, but it had been redeemed, not turned into explanation, not wrapped in tidy conclusions. Redeemed by being offered to others without pretense. On the anniversary of Emily's death, Daniel did not retreat into isolation as he once had. He invited Sarah over. They cooked together, awkward at first, then slowly more at ease. They shared memories, some painful, some unexpectedly warm. Later, alone in the quiet of the evening, Daniel sat in the living room, the lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. He reached for the Bible, not out of obligation, not out of desperation, but because he wanted to. He did not search for answers. He read slowly, attentively, letting the words exist without forcing meaning. Faith, he realized, had returned, not as certainty, but as relationship, not loud, not fragile, present. Before going to bed, Daniel knelt, not because he had to, but because gratitude had found its way back into his body. I'm still here, he said softly, and so are you. There was no response, but there was peace, the kind that does not erase scars, but no longer asks them to disappear. As Daniel lay down to sleep, the house felt different, not full, not empty, held, and somewhere within the quiet, a truth settled gently into place. God had never required Daniel to be unbroken, only willing to stay. And that was enough.